Welcome to the Sportscast. Today's date is September 28th. If you haven't yet, please subscribe in all our channels, YouTube, Periscope, and iTunes. If you're on iTunes, please leave a rating and review. It will help us out a lot. Visit us at sportscast.net. Also follow us on Twitter at the Sportscast. Today, we are here talking a little Pac-12 football. You know, they're back. They came back last Thursday in all their glory, and I, as a Pac-12 fan, an Oregon Duck fan to be specifically, I'm just absolutely excited. And today I have with me Hythloday. He, well, you can catch him on a lot of platforms, but he writes on Addicted to the Quack. So Hythloday, how's it going today, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So we were chatting a little offline. Conversation started to get really intense. We were talking about, I was trying to give Chris Peterson some praise, and he's like, no, don't go there. We're not giving Chris Peterson praise. You'll never catch me giving Jimmy Lake praise. I might give Chris Peterson praise because I actually kind of did like him in his Boise State days. I will never give Jimmy Lake praise. Today we're talking about kind of where the Pac-12 is at going into this abbreviated 2020 season, and where we think that all these teams line up as far as baseline talent, production coming back, how they kind of marinate with each other. And Hythloday does a lot of great deep dives into each specific roster, how they have performed, how the talent has performed, the actual talent that they have on the roster has performed. Have they outperformed their talent? Have they underperformed their talent? So to kind of start it off, if you were to say, and we're looking at these things completely objectively, if you were to say coming into this abbreviated season, which team with what they have coming, and there's players opting out left and right, even with the season having begun. You had Jevon Holland for Oregon, who obviously opted out 2 days ago. Which team, with just what they have on the field, would you feel the most safe in picking to win the Pac-12 currently as of today?
Oh, I still think Oregon is the odds-on favorite. And I mean, listen, I know that you and I are both Oregon fans, and so, you know, anybody else listening to this might take that with a grain of salt. But I really feel like Mario Cristobal's done an excellent job, not only stocking the team with talent, but making sure it's well distributed, you know, evenly distributed in terms of it, class balance across position groups, and they're simply in a position to, you know, replace the guys that they lost, you know, fairly smoothly. You know, that's not really true of a lot of teams in this league. And in fact, you know, having studied all the rosters throughout the Pac-12, you know, good roster management is the exception, not the rule. I actually think there's maybe only 3 good roster managers in this league. One of them is Kyle Whittingham, who does an incredible job at Utah every year in getting a lot out of, you know, punching like a heavyweight when he's got middleweight talent. You know, obviously they lost, you know, a whole lot of people this year, and they'll probably fall off, you know, substantially because of it. But, you know, it's uniform, you know, and I'm really impressed with his management. I also think that Jonathan Smith at Oregon State has done a heck of a job. You know, obviously they're limited by their talent, but he identified their weaknesses immediately on showing up in Corvallis and went right to work plugging them. And I was really impressed with his 2019 season in terms of, like, he knew where he was losing dudes, and he got the backups a lot of reps. And I actually don't think they're going to miss much of a beat despite losing folks. In fact, I think they're going to get even better on defense as a direct result of his smart roster management moves. But the king of roster management in this league, no question, is Mario Cristobal. You know, Oregon's roster is simply stacked from top to bottom with talent, and it's well distributed. There's no real positions of weakness. He didn't load up at one position so much that, like, you have a bunch of 4-stars sitting on the bench, not doing you any good. You know, he does an excellent job, and I think they're not really going to miss a beat.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with you. Even like last year, the amount of reps he got, guys like we were talking offline, Brandon Dorless, Jamal Hill, DJ James, and look how important those reps for DJ James are. All of a sudden, you have Diamond Lenore and Thomas Graham who are opting out as of now. I kind of wonder if Lenore comes back, but no matter what, those reps and James had his growing pains. If you remember the Washington game, I think Puka Nakua, who was a terrific player, got by him, but those reps are valuable, and he goes into this season. And I think you especially in our conference, he'll be able to do a pretty good job. And even offensively, Josh Delgado, Brian Addison, a mixture of Spencer Webb, and so just so many. And even a guy like Sean Dollar's got some good runs in at the beginning of the season. So yeah, I have to agree with you. His ability to just get people in there, get them reps, and once other guys move along, you kind of like, man, he's not putting that guy who's literally, man, this is the first time I've ever stepped on a collegiate field. They've already played, they've got those cobwebs out. They've gotten some experience, more than just practice. They've actually played under the bright lights. So yeah, I'd have to agree with you. His ability to get guys on the field quickly. I guess when we look at the baseline data and you just look at the rankings from an average per player, according to what the recruiting rankings are, you look at USC and who they have been over the last, in the 247 team talent composite, they have had a top 5 roster 5 years in a row. I think this year they're finally outside. They're about 10 or 11. This is probably going to actually be their weakest roster coming into a season in who knows how long. What would you say the main downfall is as such a talented roster with so many highly ranked guys coming out of high school? What would you say the main downfall of the roster, and specifically the roster that Clay Helton has been putting out there for the last several seasons?
Well, it's exactly what USC fans complain about. It might be the only thing that they've ever been right about, but the problem is Clay Helton. They simply don't develop their talent particularly well. They have 5 stars who are not playing, like 5 stars for the most part. It's interesting that this may be USC's overall least talented roster in a while. It's still the most talented in the Pac-12, whether you're looking at the entire 85 scholarships or just what I project their 2 deep to be. They still edge out Oregon and Washington by, not a huge amount, but it's noticeable. That's mostly because of the defense. On offense, they actually round out to be pretty much identical to Oregon and Washington, who are number 2 and number 3. Oregon and Washington are basically tied at 2 and 3. Oregon slightly ahead. USC edges them out, but not on offense. It's really on defense. On defense, they just have a bunch of 5 stars on defense. There's no other way to put it. And they're, when USC gets a blue chip, it's not like a borderline 4-star, barely makes the threshold kind of guy. They get 0.99s, and that's what really drags their roster average up. Now, as anybody who's watched their film can tell you, those guys don't, really play like 5 stars. And I think with Todd Orlando coming in, fans and analysts, including myself, have been calling for Clancy Pendergast to get fired for about 2 years. His defense gave up explosive plays like nobody's business. Todd Orlando's got a worse record than Clancy Pendergast does in terms of giving up explosive plays. I put out a tweet last week about it. Like, if you look at their entire careers, like, Orlando's not going to improve on that question. Overall, it's not really a talent problem that they have, especially on defense. It's sort of it's what their coordinators are doing. A lot of people are excited about their offense. Graham Harrell. I don't really find a huge schematic advantage that USC's offense has. That probably is beyond the scope of the podcast that we can deal with here. I will simply say I think that they are playing at their talent level and not really exceeding it because of what Harrell's doing. I think they're he's definitely improvement on T. Martin, who was causing them to underperform their talent. But Harrell's just causing them to perform at their talent level. Their talent level is very, very good. They have some excellent receivers. They have a couple of holes in the roster. Like, I really don't know who they're going to play at X receiver to replace Michael Pittman. Brew McCoy is the obvious choice.
Yeah.
But he had a leg injury this offseason. We don't really know what his situation is. And the next guy on the roster is probably Kyle Ford. He's a mid 3-star. That's it's sort of surprising when you
Kyle Ford is actually out for the season with an ACL injury.
Okay. I think I got that backwards then.
Brew, I think is back. Ford's out for the season with an ACL injury. Okay. I think you're thinking is John Jackson.
Oh, that could be.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, there's a couple, holes here and there in their roster. The real problem that they have on offense is their offensive line is just stars. They're in real trouble with their offensive line. They're going to have a hard time putting 5 dudes on the field now that Elijah Vera Tucker has gone off. And there's a bunch of, who their backups are. Beats me. They have one identified Didich at center, but everybody else is like, I don't know, man. And they're going to be playing guys out of position. They're going to be playing like McKenzie's a guard. They're going to have him playing tackle. They get Nealon back. I think Nealon might be the worst center in the Pac-12. He's just physically not strong enough to play the position. He gets run over by nose guards all the time. So, some of the air raid that Harrell runs sort of covers that up because the ball's out of Slovis's hand so quickly. But Slovis has a tendency to play kind of hero ball. I mean, I think that Slovis is the best quarterback in the Pac-12. I like him. He tries to keep the play alive way longer than he should. The play will break down. The offensive line will definitely let pressure through, and then he tries to find something amazing to do. And when he does, it's highlight reel stuff, and good for him. But I actually think on balance, if you consider the good with the bad probably outweighs it. I mean, he's prone to turnovers. He's prone to putting the ball on the ground and throwing interceptions. And it probably net hurts him. I mean, it's definitely what costed them the BYU game. It was a big part of what cost them the game against Oregon. And, I hate to blame a guy for health problems or sound like I'm doing so. I'm definitely not. I hope he finishes the season without a single injury, like I do for all kids. But like that guy missed like 3-4 games last year. And a part of that is he's not getting rid of the ball with an offensive line that doesn't protect him. And they're in trouble because they've got one other quarterback on the roster. So
Matt Fink, right?
Right. Who, it is true, won them the Utah game, and arguably only Matt Fink could have won them the Utah game playing like YOLO ball against Utah's, elite DBs. But, you saw, how, that guy can't beat Washington. That guy can't beat Iowa, they're in trouble if Slovis gets hurt. I hope he doesn't, but it is a the quarterback situation is a microcosm for the rest of USC's offense, which is, it's a very talented in the front line. God help them if they take an injury. And that's on Clay Helton for poor roster management. It is simply not a robust team. It is not a well-developed team. It is a very talented team, and that's about all you can say about it.
I mean, you see Steven, I'm looking at the running backs, and you have Stephen Carr, former 5-star, and I'm going to screw this name up, but it's Vivia Malapai. He's a former 4-star who was actually committed to Oregon. Marquis Stepp, 4-star. I mean, you have some of the
even
best
their
running...
fourth stringer. Their fourth stringer, King Kristen, is an incredible running back.
Yeah, wasn't he he was a state track guy in San Diego, wasn't he, in high school?
No. It's incredible. Actually, running back is sort of the exception to what I just said, in terms of like they run deep at running back. It's the only position they run real deep at, but my goodness. Of course, they have that room in an air raid offense that massively underutilizes their running backs. So go figure.
I mean, I'm just looking at that. I'm like, how much you could get out of that running back room, but with a poor O-line and obviously an air raid system. It was a pretty marginal running attack last season, and let's see if it's better this year. But you constantly hear USC. If it's not Oregon, it's USC being brought up. But all I can think of is the last couple of years, Clay Helton's walked in with the best roster by a mile in the Pac-12, and he's finished 5-7 and 8-5. And he's gotten just absolutely his doors blown off when he's played any team that's really any good. So other than Utah, they did beat Utah, but I would have a hard time thinking that they're going to get it together this season. And like you said, they have a good quarterback in Slovis. They do have the talent that can be kind of mesmerizing, but a team that's played well below the talent level so far, I would just be kind of surprised if they all of a sudden just turned it around, especially since they have the same head coach.
I mean, they're my pick to win the South. We should probably say we were recording this on Monday night. It is before the Pac-12 has released what the schedules are going to be. It may be that by the time this podcast releases or anybody listens to it, that the schedules have come out and, they look really lopsided, and some of the things that we might say in terms of predictions for how the season goes might suddenly look real silly.
Mm-hmm.
But in a vacuum anyway, I think that USC is a pretty clear path to win the South. I really think Arizona State's the only team that might have the ponies. Yeah, for the same reason that they beat Oregon last year. They have enough talent that they can pull some stuff off and surprise you, and it may be that USC is the victim of that. But that would pretty much be the only one. The rest of the South is just it's a crater at this point in terms of talent. And so I think, just like happens a lot of years, USC is probably going to fall backwards into the South Division title, and they'll face Oregon in the championship game. And I sort of think the game will look fairly. I mean, it may not be a crazy blowout. That was sort of the 2019 Oregon USC game was probably somewhat a product of a couple of weird things going on. Mikhail Wright housing a kick return, with 20 seconds left in the half. Like, I don't know if that's going to happen again, but like it was clear which team had developed and fielded their talent better, had better coordinators, and had, a better game plan. It was clear, all the things that a coach does for a team, it was very clear what Mario Cristobal was doing for Oregon and what Clay Helton was doing for USC, or to USC maybe. And, both of those coaches return with largely pretty similar staffs. I think that Oregon has upgraded an offensive coordinator. I think the USC has downgraded a defensive coordinator. So it actually really wouldn't surprise me if Oregon blew them out again. I mean, knock on wood. I probably shouldn't say that too loud, but yeah.
It would surprise me. I agree with you.
I don't really see much, other than the fact that Oregon's got to replace their offensive line. Maybe we'll talk about that next, but like we were talking about to open up with, these are Mario Cristobal's recruits, and they played extensively in backup time over the last 2 years. I really like Oregon's offensive line. The new starters, I don't think they're going to miss a beat. And if that's the case, then I don't really see what's different about Oregon USC in 2020, other than it's played in Autzen Stadium.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you are hearing a lot of, you see on message boards, and of course I read them. I don't know if you read them as much as me, but whether it be Peristyle or the Husky board, and they're like, well, Oregon's replacing 5 offensive linemen. I'm like, first of all, Mario Cristobal is an offensive line coach. These are all his recruits, and these guys have all played. Stephen Jones, Alex Forsyth, TJ Bass hasn't played. I kind of think he somehow ends up being the center, but he's still a JUCO guy. He's played 2 years of college ball. He's still a junior. He has development. You have at right guard. You have I'm terrible with these names. Sala. Can you say his name? Sala Amamuva. Masala.
I think it's Aumavaila Ulu. It's Malasala Uvila Ulu.
Okay, there you go. And then probably Jonah Tanu over at right tackle. You do wonder about George Moore.
Got even more experience. Yeah. And on top of that, they have depth too. Like they've got, Jaramelo's a 4-star, Randazzo's a high 3-star.
Jonathan Dennis,
is a 4-star.
Logan Sagapolo.
Right. He came in the he reclassified as a 2020. I actually think the 10th guy on the line is going to be a surprise blast of the past name for Oregon fans, Sam Patassi, who is a low 3-star, but he's going to be a redshirt senior. He was one of the guys who got rhabdo under Willie Taggart and that horrible nonsense. God bless him. But I got to see him play in garbage time last year when I was doing my garbage time review this summer. And like Sam Patassi is redshirt junior last year, will be a redshirt senior in 2020, is playing like a redshirt senior. If it comes to him having to play, like Hell, man, St. Potosí would be a starter at most Pac-12 teams. Most Pac-12 teams have bad offensive lines. I am
Yeah.
not joking. And as you said, here's the other thing about Oregon's offensive line situation is that, like, Oregon accomplished what it accomplished over the last 2 years. Those weren't Mario Cristobal's guys. Those were Steve Greatwood's guys. Those were like 295-pound zone blockers
Yeah.
who were recruited primarily for the athleticism. And, you know, Cristobal got what he got out of them, first of all, because he and Alex Mirabal are great coaches, particularly at the offensive line. And second, because, you know, they were seniors, they knew what they were doing, but they were playing above their talent level. The guys who are replacing them uniformly are more talented and are simply bigger bodies and are more suited to the type of football that Mario Cristobal wants to play. And, you know, we'll see what Joe Moorhead does. I wrote an entire film study article about him. It's actually my pinned tweet. If anybody wants to go to my Twitter page, it's Hythloday1. The pinned tweet is a film study of Joe Moorhead, 11 years of his career as a play caller, in which every single year he uses like a different playbook. You know, we're not talking about like Mike Leach or Ken Niumatalolo here, where it's like, I figured out my system in 1985 and I'm running it ever since. Like, nah, man, he like seriously evaluates the talent that he has and reinvents himself every year. And his track record is very, very good at doing that. So, you know, I have a feeling that when you put him on a team that's got as much talent as Oregon does, you know, and he's had this much time to study film and look it over and figure out what he's got, that like, yeah, I have no doubt that Oregon's going to have a better offense than it did last year. And Oregon had a pretty good offense last year. They were number 19 S&P plus. You know, people like to bag on Marcus Arroyo, but like, you know, for all the different problems that they had, you know, if people want to complain about the play calling or Justin Herbert's inconsistency or the fact that wide receivers were never healthy at any point, or Jacob Breland, the tight end, broke his leg, and et cetera, like, for all of that, they put the number 19 offense on the field. And that's with an offensive line that wasn't the guys that Mario Cristobal wanted to play. And now he's got the guys they want to play. That's why I'm not worried about Oregon's offensive line. Yeah, if you're not worried about Oregon's offensive line, you're not worried about that team, because that's it. That's all they're replacing. Well, you know, that and the quarterback. I guess we could get into that if you want.
I mean, I think that their offensive I've been keeping track, not to the dogmatic style that you have of their talent, but I keep track of the data of each position. And their most talented group going into this year is their pass catchers, the wide receivers and tight ends. They have 3 former top 100 guys in Micah Pittman, Devin Williams, Brian Addison. They have several other 4-stars. They have a 3-year starter in Johnny Johnson, a 2-year starter in Jalen Redd. And then guys
is a
like
4-star.
And then you get, like you said, Cam McCormick is back. Hunter Camp-Mayor, he's not great in the pass catching, but he's a terrific blocker. Spencer Webb's obviously a threat in the pass game. I think Patrick Herbert was a consensus 4-star coming out. I think their pass catching group is going to shock a lot of people. I ranked them as the second best group, but I was kind of like, there was a part of me being like, in my heart, I don't want to come across as a duck homer, but I would take that group in some ways over USC's if they can play to their potential.
This is going to sound monstrous. I don't mean it to be. I know where you're coming from, because I think it is a deeper group than USC's wide receiver group. Like, you know, if you told me I could only have 3 wide receivers, you know, I would take, you know, St. Brown and Vaughns and Drake London. If you told me that I could have 6 receivers, I would take Oregon's group. Because I think top to bottom, you know, given that you're probably going to have to deal with injuries over the course of the year, I hate to say that, but it's true. It's true every year for every team. Yeah, that's true. I mean, the only group well, there are other groups that have comparable talent at the top line. You know, Washington does, Arizona State does, but in terms of, you know, what they have demonstrated that they can do and what their depth of talent is, I think Oregon edges them out. I am curious to see how Washington's wide receiver group performs, because I think everybody identified last year that they were playing the wrong guys. They had like a weird fidelity to senior receivers who weren't able to catch the ball and weren't able to play outside receiver. And now their hand has been forced. They have to play their 4-star young kids because that's all they have. So but they didn't really get a ton of reps, you know, like everybody's very excited about Nakua. he's got what, like 6 catches,
Yeah.
like they really, they have not put a ton on film, and they, their wide receiver coach made a bunch of dumb decisions last year. So, it's one of those questions where if you just want to go by talent, Washington might have the most, Washington has a good argument for having the best wide receiver room in the Pac-12, but they haven't proved it yet. They have one of the lowest returning productions in the country. We're just gonna have to, we're just gonna have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah, with Washington in general, because you kind of know, I mean, that Jimmy Lake's going to put a good defense out. I mean, I was looking at their secondary today when you're looking at guys like Elijah Bolden, who decided to come back, Heath Traylor, Kyler Gordon. I love Trent McDuffie. He was terrific at St. John Bosco, Cam Williams. I look at that defense, especially that secondary. I'm a little less. Their front seven, they lost 2 good players.
Yes.
Very, very good players.
Not just 2 good players, but 2 very important players to the structure of their defense, and irreplaceable ones. I actually think their front seven went from a mediocre front seven, all things considered, to I actually think Washington's front seven is just straight up bad at this point. With the loss of both Onwuzurike and Tryon, I think they're in real trouble there. But as you say, it is a very talented. You're correct. It is a very talented defensive back group, and that is a defensive back led defense and a defensive minded head coach. I think that they will probably be fine. I don't think they're going to have a terrible defense, but we were talking about roster management earlier. I have a big problem. I don't know how well Jimmy Lake is going to be able to manage the roster, and he's taken over in kind of a weird time. I have a hard time directing a whole lot of hate his way. Even as an
even though you want to.
And on social media, there's definitely been some temptation to do so. But how much do you?
I have never done that. I have never talked trash.
But I mean, he's inheriting a Chris Peterson roster where Washington has been very good at accumulating talent. They have not been very good at distributing it and making sure that it is well distributed. And really, on the defense is where that shows out. Where they have a dozen or more 4-star defensive backs. Jimmy, you can't play 12 defensive backs at once. You can't, you can't even play 11 defensive backs at once, where they have a ton of 4-stars sitting on the bench. And in the meantime, they're going to be playing multiple walk-ons. They're probably going to be playing Jazana Bronson and Edwan Olafosio, the linebacker. And I think Brian Bowman was a former walk-on. I'm not sure, but he's certainly
Ryan Bowman was? No, he's a good player.
I disagree. I
you don't like Ryan Bowman?
I think he's fine. I think he's a mediocre athletic.
I heard he's actually moving. Yesterday I actually read that they're moving him to the edge. He's going to kind of take over Joe Tyrone. They would have to, but without Tryon and Onwuzurike. I mean, frankly, Onwuzurike was playing out of position last year because they didn't have better options on the outside. That's another one where, they have a ton of 4-star defensive linemen, but all the 4-star defensive linemen that they recruited other than Onwuzurike are the big space. They play in a 2-4-5 defense. They should switch given their roster to a 4-2-5, but they won't because I don't think they're that creative. The problem is in a 2-4-5, you need, the 2 different types of defensive tackles. You need the big space filler type and you need the disruptive type. Onwuzurike was the disruptive type, and that was it. The rest of the 4-stars they have Taimane, Latulinga Sanoa, Bondas, Tuatele, Jacob Bandas.
Palma was another one of them, but he's left the team. All these guys, the huge space fillers, and it's like they've stacked up. It's redundancy. They have they're so deep to the point of redundancy at one position, and they're empty at the other position to the point where they're having to play Josiah Bronson, who's a former walk-on. Or look at the linebackers, right? Everybody identified the inside linebackers that Washington has as their big vulnerability last year. Guess what? They didn't fix that problem. that, they returned a couple of guys who couldn't beat out those dudes last year, and they're probably gonna have to play walk on Ulufosio, and 3 stars, Tfise, Mickey Ayu, Tupola Fatui, all these guys are 3 stars.
Now, is Daniel is Daniel Hamuli, is he in inside?
I believe he is inside, but he didn't play at all last year. Same with Sermon, Jackson Sermon. I believe he's the cousin of Jacob Sermon, the maybe quarterback. Who I can't. I think he's borderline either a 3 or 4 star. My point being that, like, if you look at the heat map of their talent distribution, it's there's a giant void in terms of talent in the middle of the field. They're deep to the point of redundancy at their space filling defensive line. They are deep to the point of redundancy at defensive backs, and they've got nobody in the middle of the field. That's bad roster management. And I lay that at the feet of Chris Peterson, or really Bob Gregory, the linebackers coach, who I have no idea why they retained. He might be one of the worst position coaches in the Pac-12. So that's an example, where Oregon and Washington, if you look at the aggregate talent, if you just, close your eyes and look at all the total numbers, they have very, very similar total aggregate talent levels. If you look at the actual 2-deeps that they will probably put on the field and try to like smooth it out in terms of talent, Oregon's so much better in terms of having a nice balanced talent. Like, the worst position that they have in terms of raw talent on the defense is their defensive line, because I think, their big guys in the middle are all 3 stars, right? Jordan Scott is a mid 3-star.
Austin Falliou.
Falliou is a mid 3-star. Brandon Dorlus, who we talked about, is a 3-star. Popo he's technically a 3-star. I think he's a 0.88. Those 4 guys are probably their big guys in the middle of the line. Those are the 4 stars. That's the, quote unquote talent void for Oregon. We've seen all 4 of those dudes play. Those guys wreck shop, no problems there. Right. So, that's why I say, even though that Oregon and Washington, like, their aggregate talent level, if you look at the 85-man roster, looks very similar. If you actually break down what the production on the field is and how it's distributed through unit groups, there's no comparison. Oregon is definitely going to field a better defense than Washington.
And I'm looking at the linebacker group, and they had like they did Latui. I'm terrible at names. Latui, and then they have Daniel Hamili, they have Josh Calvert. So they have recruited these guys, but you're right, they didn't play at all. So
and they're also sort of the wrong distribution of body types. It's like they've got 8 different dudes who all play the same, a role where they only need 1 of them, or 2 for rotational purposes. So it's like, good work. You have a bunch of 4 stars, even high 4 stars sitting on the bench. How much good is that doing you?
And you even kind of wonder about Savell Smalls. I saw him play in the Under Armour game, and I saw the practice clips from him that week, and he's just kind of a tweener. Is he going to play an edge guy? Are they going to move him inside? Is he going to play on the line? And he would be another one that you'd fit into that guy that you'd wonder this year if all of a sudden halfway through the season he's hardly playing, and yet he's a 5-star.
It could be. He could also just kick butt. He
could. But he's kind of a. If you've seen him play at all, it's kind of hard to pin him exactly what he's going to be.
I'm going to have to plead. I study college film because I can watch the entirety of college film and against college athletes. I'm not the right person to ask about evaluating high school film, especially like high school highlight reels. I am just not good enough of a film evaluator. Like I need to watch an entire college game, multiple college games against college opponents to come to opinions about guys. I really don't have any opinion about Smalls at all, other than to say he's one guy. Even if he kicks butt, if the rest of the defensive structure is wasting talent and has avoided inside linebacker, like the ass kicking version of Savell Smalls, it doesn't make up for a lot of the problems that Washington's defense is going to have.
And then their offense is, we were talking, obviously we already kind of hit on them, but obviously breaking in pretty much a whole new wide receiver core.
Sure.
Most of the running back, they obviously lose Salvin Ahmad, who I've always thought he was overrated. He did end up
Well, it
getting
was a step
drafted
down
anyways.
from Myles Gaskin. I mean, that's
For
really
sure.
the thing that's astonishing about Washington is that their run blocking has just not been very good for the last couple of years. And Myles Gaskin covered up for a lot of that because he was an amazing yards after contact back. And then Salvin Ahmed, who I didn't have a problem with Salvin Ahmed. I thought he was a fine running back. He was a running back like 90% of all running backs, who, he gets the yards that his offensive line buys him.
Mhm.
And just his offensive line wasn't buying him that many yards. So like, I ain't got no problems there. I also don't really have any problems with the rest of his running backs. I just don't think any of them are Myles Gaskin either.
Yep. So breaking in a new running back core for the most part, new wide receiver group. Obviously, there's going to be a new quarterback, whether it be Sermons, maybe Garbers. Young Garbers might come in and win the job. And then I believe they only returned 2 offensive linemen. They returned Jackson Kirkland, as long as I'm assuming he doesn't opt out. And then is it Wattenberger? Is that the other guy that they're returning? Okay.
Yeah.
Is that so? They only returned on an offense that they're replacing the offensive coordinator. They're putting in a new scheme. They're having a new quarterback. They have all new skill positions. Overall, they're only put on an offense that wasn't very good. They're only bringing back 2 starters,
Right.
bringing in a new
and
scheme.
on top of that, they're probably going to be playing him out of position. I don't think much of their offensive line coach, Scott Huff. I actually sort of got into it with Washington fans this summer about him. I don't think he's a very good developer at all. I think he makes screwy decisions. And one of the screwy decisions he's apparently going to make is moving Kirkland to be left tackle, which is not where he naturally plays, and moving Wattenberg, who, if you were going to return, he was probably the weakest of their offensive linemen. I didn't think much of their offensive line. He's going to be their center, or at least good chance. I think both, I think they're in trouble. Now, I guess I should say this, like there is definitely a version of the Washington offense that could be very, very good, and makes all of us look like idiots, because they've got a choice between multiple 4 stars at quarterback. I think the running backs are fine. I don't think they're Myles Gaskin, but they're not going to embarrass you. They've got a ton of talent at wide receiver, and they're going to be forced to play it, as we were talking about a minute ago. The least talented guy that they have in the offense in terms of his 247 rating is Cade Otton, their tight end. I think Cade Otton's probably the best tight end in the Pac-12, or tied with Brant Keithy at Utah. They're, at least on paper, they have a ton of talent at offensive line. They recruited really well in the last couple of classes at offensive line. If they're, this could be a USC type team where, like, even though I don't think much of their coaches, and I don't think much of John Donovan, that they might, if they just play at their talent level, this could be an excellent offense. Frankly, it's loaded with talent. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to have problems on offense. I don't really like their development at offensive line. I think that the reason why they're having such a hard time picking between their 4 stars at quarterback is because those guys aren't real good. I think that Sermon probably has decision-making problems. That's why they've brought in 2 different transfers over the course of the time that he's been there. And I think that Dylan Morris, from watching his high school film, I know I just said that I'm not very good at evaluating high school film, but even a dummy like me can see that guy's that guy doesn't have an arm at all. That guy's got a sub Browning arm attached to him. While it is very true that there is a version of Washington's offense that is loaded with talent, that plays at that talent level and makes everybody look dumb, there's also a version of this offense that is god awful, just like the most you can't watch it offense in the Pac-12. And I think the latter is more likely to happen than the former.
Especially this season, because obviously many teams only got in a spring practice or 2 or 3, and you're implementing a totally new offense. And like you said, John Donovan, we didn't really talk about it much, but he was the guy who Joe Moorhead replaced at Penn State. So I wouldn't exactly say it was a hire that everyone was just jumping up and down about. So I just new quarterback, new scheme, little bit just wonky off season. I'd be not pleasantly, because clearly I do not want Washington to have a great offense, but I would be if they started going out and clicking on all cylinders. And I do like guys like I like Newton, the running back, and I love Puka Nacua. I wanted Oregon to get him, but I'd be very surprised if they came out and they're just beating it. I want to bring up, okay, so the team that I more layman's people that I hear bring up as being a possible threat to Oregon in the Pac-12 North has actually not been Washington. It's been Cal. I've heard several people say, oh, but I think Cal might win it this year. I got John Wilner even said it, who of course is, I think I love Wilner stuff, but I look at, for me personally, I know how the level they recruit at. I know what they're bringing back. I know what they have in particular on the offensive and defensive line. And I don't see it. I mean, I like Justin Wilcox. I think he's a good coach. I think he's a guy that has done very well with the talent he's had. I love how his secondary has played. He's obviously gotten those guys to the next level like Cam Bynum. But I'm not seeing Cal. And when I look at the talent, they have one of the least talented rosters in the Pac-12.
Yes.
And
I show them that 10 out of 12.
Yeah, and I believe when I'm not looking at it right now, but I think it was about the same when I sent it to you. And I just remember them last year. Their offensive line is just not good. Their defensive line is just not any good. Evan Weaver had a lot of tackles, but he no wonder why. Half tackles were down the field. The secondary played for the most part pretty well, but then they've lost most of those guys. The offense is back, but the offense wasn't good. So cool that you're bringing back 8-9 guys on the offense. I believe it's what it is, but they weren't very good. So I wonder if you're kind of thinking the same as me. I know that people say Cal's they're gonna threaten Oregon. And I know Oregon's playing in Cal in front of no fans, so that's really scary. But I'm not buying Cal. I just don't think they're very good.
I couldn't have said it better myself. You hit every point that I wanted to make. They're really just not a very talented team. And, it's true they returned 90% of their offensive production, but their offensive production was poor last year. It's sort of, and at that point it becomes that's not a blessing, that's a curse. You're bringing back all those guys who caused you to not produce very much. You're right about the offensive line. That's the huge liability. They're returning all those guys. That's probably not a good thing. I will say about Cal that about their offensive line specifically, that they have a really good left tackle. He was playing as a true freshman. His name is Will Craig. He was injured and he missed most of the year. So they get him back, and let's all hope that he gets to play a full season and he remains healthy. But that's still one out of one good, offensive lineman does not an offensive line make. And the other thing is that Chase Garbers, I like Chase Garbers. I like that he came back from injury. I mean, he had the same injury as Justin Herbert. What's not to like? But I mean, the thing about him, the thing that's interesting about Chase Garbers, the thing that, makes him fun to watch is that he's scrambling all the time. And he's pretty good when he's scrambling, but you have to ask yourself the question, why is this guy scrambling all the time? And part of the answer is because his offensive line stinks. And part of the reason is because he leaves the pocket too early. I do the film study on the guy. He's not making decisions like a quarterback is supposed to make decisions. I think it's unfortunate, but I think that his injury history and the fact that he was playing on a quarterback roulette in 2018 with Brandon McElwain, remember that? I think that's probably hindered his development. That's unfortunate. You hate to see that. That unironically, I hate to see that, that's talent being wasted. I just don't really, and you can tell from, their wide receiver. I really like the running backs. I should say that. I really like Christopher Brown, in particular. That's a hard running back. He was I collect kind of a weird stat on my tally sheet, which is how often you turn what would have been a failed play into a successful play. By surviving the first guy who attempts to tackle you. Number one in the conference was Zach Moss for Utah. I don't think anybody should be surprised by that. No. That guy was just incredible at turning, and also played behind a pretty lousy offensive line, which is why he was getting hit so early. But But number 2 was Christopher Brown. That guy's a hell of a running back. I like him a lot. The rest of their skill talent is not good. There's just no other way to put it. Like, it's very clear on film, that the receivers are not getting separation, that the reason why the third reason why Garbers is scrambling, between a bad offensive line and the fact that he's, not reading the field super well is because, who the hell is he going to throw to? All his receivers are covered. So yeah, I'm not a big believer in their offense, and I'm also not a big believer in their defense. Largely not because I don't think Justin Wilcox and his hires are good. It is kind of weird that they have Peter Sherman calling the plays because he was terrible at Louisville, Mississippi State. But whatever. I think that's probably survivable. I don't think it's really a schematic issue. I think it's a talent issue, and they're losing all the talent. They've lost all their linebackers. They lost over the last 2 years. They lost Jordan Kanashik and Evan Weaver in a 2-man defensive back or linebacker structure. The guy they got to replace him, the transfer from the JUCO, Quang Dang, is maybe the worst linebacker in the Pac-12. He seriously did not know how to play the inside linebacker position. It's astonishingly bad. And then because Evan Weaver played every single snap for the last 2 years, the backup never got any experience, and so that's probably going to be a liability. They lost all their safeties. They were going to bring back Hicks and Bynum, both of their cornerbacks, but then Bynum decided to opt out, so they're bringing back one defensive back from a pretty good defensive back group. And then the problem with their defensive line is they lost their nose guard. It was a guy named Chris Palmer in 2018. He was absolutely crucial to their defensive line structure. He left after the end of the 2018. They basically didn't replace him in 2019. It showed they were not able to stop the run whatsoever, and they still haven't fixed that problem. So their defense really fell off from 2018 2019. If you look at the advanced stats, they fell from like a top 10 defense to a number 50 defense. I think they're going to fall even further in 2020. I just don't see it with Cal, and it starts exactly as you said, because they don't have any talent. They're 10 out of 12 in terms of talent in the Pac-12. Anybody who's picking them to win the North is, I want what you're having, because
I think it's I tried to dig why people are doing it. Maybe it's because they just it seems like maybe Oregon is getting too rich and they're seeing players opting out, and they're like, oh well, who are we going to pick? Well, maybe Cal. They're starting quarterbacks back. You're probably not going to say Washington. They have a new coach, new quarterback. You're not going to say Stanford because, well, no one likes Stanford. And then Oregon State and Washington State, obviously, who are who they are. So maybe that's kind of why it is. But I kind of agree. I wouldn't be shocked if Cal didn't win any games.
I have a hard time figuring out what football coaches who are paid, tens of millions of dollars to do what they do. I have a hard enough time figuring out their decision-making thought process. Don't ask me to also figure out what sport writers are thinking.
I agree. I haven't mentioned them yet, but in the Pac-12 North, Stanford. They obviously had their All-American first-round draft pick, Walker Little. He opted out. They have had, I believe, I'm doing this off the top of my head, I believe they've had 13 guys hit the transfer portal since the end of last season. They had 2 more enter the transfer portal in the last week. So
the transfer portal stuff is a little misleading, because a lot of guys got into the portal and then got back out, but effectively they are losing 8 starters between the offense and the defense to transfer, plus Walker Little, their starting left tackle. Although, to be perfectly honest, I didn't really think much of Walker Little. I didn't think he lived up to being a 5-star, largely because he was getting injured all the time. But yes, they have a serious problem with dudes leaving their program, and that was off of a 4-8 team. So yes, I have a hard time seeing them breaking through.
Now you see they have the talent. From just a baseline perspective, they probably have the 4th best roster, and that probably they do according to the recruiting rankings. What has not worked, in your opinion, in utilizing the talent the last couple seasons? And do you think something could change this season? Or that's basically.
Well, I'll answer the last question first, which is no, I don't think anything's going to change. I think if anything, they're going to get worse. And I was early on the Stanford is in trouble. I was writing that in the beginning of 2018, just from doing film study on them that he couldn't block. You are right. The way that I put together the numbers, they are the 4th most talented team, but there is no bigger cliff between between numbers than between the 3 and the 4 between Washington and Stanford. It is enormous how much they fall off. And then the rest of the league is almost not worth considering. They have so little talent. ASU is probably the one that we need to talk about next, but we'll talk about them when we talk about them. Stanford, no, I don't think they're climbing out of it. Here's the thing that's interesting. I also broke down their offense versus their defense. Their offensive recruiting has actually been fine. They're still averaging better than a 4-star in their 2 deep, even with the departure of Walker Little, a 5-star tackle. I think what's holding him back offensively is, David Shaw and Tavita Pritchard and Mike Bloomgren, the offensive line coach. They're simply not getting out of their offensive line what they need to be. And David Shaw is too stubborn to change his offense, to realize that, USC had a bad offensive line the last couple of years, but they did well in 2019 because they had an offense that got the ball out of the quarterback's hands very quickly. David Shaw's not going to implement, a radical offensive overhaul like that because it's David Shaw. He's, he's very conservative head coach. I was going to make a joke, but probably bad taste in these times.
Feel free.
Yeah, let's not. He's a very conservative coach. He wasn't going to implement any sort of offensive change. He's going to run an offense that assumes having a better offensive line that he does. Yeah. And that's going to, mean that he's going to underperform his talent. On the defensive side of the ball, I actually don't really think much of Lance Anderson as a defensive coordinator. I think he's probably been underperforming his talent, but on top of that, they just have big talent problems. They're recruiting like a 3-star program, an average on the defensive side of the ball. They had two of the guys who hit the transfer portal and meant it and really cleared out are their 2 defensive tackles, Jovan Swan and Michael Williams. That is a huge blow. They are really going to have trouble at the defensive line. They were not effectively able to recover from the loss of Bubba Okereke at the end of the 2018 season. They've been playing converted, safeties and such at inside linebacker. I mean, that's a situation that's as bad as Washington's in terms of the inside linebackers, in terms of like, who the heck are they playing? They have a guy who is, they have Curtis Robinson, not the guitar player, but the converted safety playing linebacker. But unlike Utah, which successfully converts safeties into linebackers, Stanford has not been successful at turning that guy into a good linebacker. That's a situation that's more like Cal across the bay, where, the dude has all the, recruiting ranking numbers in the world, but he is playing like a 2-star. So that's a big problem for Stanford's defense. And the real problem with their talent rating is their defensive backs. They simply have not been bringing in the talent at defensive back. And they're typically playing in a nickel defense without a lot of talent there, which is a strange thing to say because I think that Stanford needs to clean house in terms of their coaching staff. I think that's really the problem there, is that they've calcified into a culture of just complacency. That was an alliteration that I didn't intend. Anyway, if there's one coach that I would salvage from all those guys, it's probably Dwayne Aquina, their defensive backs coach. And so it's weird that his unit group in particular is what's killing their talent rating. That might be one of the situations where a coach could get sort of long in the tooth, becomes a really great developer, but he loses energy for recruiting. I don't know. I couldn't say, but it definitely appears to be the case based on their, recruiting rankings. And you could see it on the field. One of the guys that cleared out in the transfer portal, Obi Ebo, who I think is transferring to UCLA. It's like no great loss there. That guy was not a good cornerback. And they managed to hold on to Paulson Adebo, who I really do think is an excellent DB. He had some bad plays against UCF go viral on Twitter. I don't really hold that much against him. He got left on an island way too long. That guy's legit. That guy really is an excellent.
Do you think he plays this fall?
I mean, he said he will. I have no reason to doubt his word. He shouldn't, He
was the guy that I was expecting. I'm shocked he hasn't opted out.
It would be it is irrational to return. If you were a top 1 or 2 round draft pick and you come back, you are only risking losing money. It is now, this is college football, and the fact that kids are irrational is part of the reason why we love it, and it's so unpredictable. So who knows? But if I were him, I would go. Certainly other players on his team have recognized that is a sinking ship, and they jumped it. So I don't know.
Look at they're another one that has, their receiver talent. Connor Winnington was a blue chipper. Osiris St. Brown was. John Humphreys, Elijah Higgins.
Michael Williams.
Yep.
EJ. Michael Williams. I'm sorry. You go ahead.
They have Austin Jones, who was a 4-star running back. EJ
I
Smith
actually
is
really
coming in.
like him as a running back. I actually think they're going to improve the running back position now that
They
they've
have,
gotten rid of,
and they have 2 top 100 quarterbacks. They had a former 5-star in Davis Mills and Tanner McGee, who came back from his Mormon mission. So you look at the skill position talent, and it's actually it is on par with USC, Oregon, and Washington. But like you said, I probably didn't look at it from as an in-depth analytical perspective as you did, but just seeing how Stanford, there seemed to be this trajectory going down. I just saw it started even at the last year McCaffrey, and then the year that they kept on throwing jump balls all day. Costello threw it to Whiteside, but I just saw as a team, I didn't like the way the team looked. And then by last season, they were terrible. They were a 4-8 team and weren't even competitive.
They got kind of a reprieve in the second half of 2018 when they realized they had a bunch of undefendable wide receivers, and and KJ Costello could lob passes up to them. All that's gone now. KJ Costello's gone, and all those big receivers are gone now. They actually, I agree with you. I like their wide receiver core. I actually think if David Shaw drove down to Los Angeles and kidnapped Graham Harrell and made him the offensive coordinator for Stanford, that they could probably have an offense that was as effective as USC's was last year. In fact, they kind of look identical to USC in terms of, they've got they have a talented quarterback, they have a talented wide receiver room, they have a talented running back. Their offensive line is not very good, and that's really the Achilles heel. And they have an offensive coordinator right now, they do, who's calling the wrong offense for it. If they had a different kind of offense, I actually think that Stanford could have a very effective offense, but it's David Shaw, so he's not going to kidnap Graham Harrell or make any changes to his offense, and so it's going to be just as problematic as last year. I mean, I set your watch to it. That's David Shaw.
Yeah, he's stuck in his ways, and the problem is his ways are going by, and he's getting what used to work, he doesn't even have anymore. So I
think if he had the offensive line that he thought I think if his offensive line really were a bunch of butt kickers, the way that they looked like they were going to be at the beginning of 2018, like I'll own up to it. I, like a lot of analysts in the 2018 off season, in like July, August of 2018, we looked at Stanford's offensive line and we said, this is one of the best offensive lines in the country. It's definitely the best offensive line in the Pac-12. And then I watched the tape of their first 3 games and I was like, these guys are terrible. They cannot block for the, to save their lives. And I was one of the first people, in the country to write like Stanford is going to collapse. And look,
and you're like, hey, look at I agree. No, I can't deny it.
And all those things still obtain. That's the thing, is that like everything that made Stanford bad over the last 2 seasons is still in place, or in many places have gotten worse. So I see absolutely no reason for them to suddenly turn it around. If anything, I think it'll get worse. Now, like I said, I don't really think it's a matter of the time passing them by. I think that football is cyclical, and I think that Stanford, if they had the offensive line that, a good offensive line that played at their talent level and had a good offensive line coach who developed them well and avoided injuries, they could run that offense just fine and they would be a very effective team. But they don't. They have a bad offensive line, and so they should be running a different kind of offense, but they won't run a different kind of offense because it's David Shaw.
So, a long story short, we have covered, we didn't cover Oregon State. Do you want to cover Oregon State and Washington State quickly? We've covered most of the North. Is there much to say? I know, obviously, you mentioned Jonathan Smith at the beginning. You think he actually is one of the better coaches.
I do. I think
do you have anything to say else on Oregon State in regards
I think
to
we can probably keep it quick simply because, they're probably not going to contend for the North, but I do like the direction that they're going. I like Jonathan Smith as a coach. There are other film reviewers in the Pac-12, and one thing that we all agree on is just schematically, he calls a very pretty game.
Yeah, he does.
like and just all the questions of like coaching acumen, right? Like, so what does coaching acumen come down to? It's not just play calling. He calls a good game. It's not just roster management. He manages his roster very well. It's not just analyzing the opponent. He does that very well. It's also hiring. He put together a hell of a coaching staff, and he kept it together. He's the only coach in the Pac-12 where there isn't a single departure. I believe that's the case. Utah might be the second team, though they came close to having a departure.
Yes, he hung on by the string of his neck.
I really think that there's no, in terms of plus value, like pure coaching acumen, what you bring to your team, acknowledging that the talent that they have. He did a hell of a job, and I think he's going to continue to do a hell of a job. And if he were coaching at any other school than Oregon State, I would say he's not going to be long for Corvallis, because some other team's going to snap him up. But he's a hometown hero. He was a quarterback on like their best team that they've had in 20 years. I think he might be there for a long time, and mark my words, he's going to beat some teams that are not going to see it coming.
So
but in terms of talent,
would you be so not to interrupt you, would you be surprised, especially in this abbreviated season, if Oregon State is the number 2 team in the Pac-12 North this year?
They were in 2019. Like, it's really I would have to see.
They're all number 2.
I'd have to see their schedule. And on top of that, one of the really, this is really going to be sad to say. A really key piece of their team is they have one of the weaknesses that Jonathan Smith identified when he came to Corvallis in 2018 was they had no beef on the defensive line at all. And he went to repairing that right away. And the really key player that he had in his defensive line, he had 2 of them. One is Elu Aiden. He was just this totally enormous dude. They've lost him. He had mobility problems. The better guy was a guy named Jordan Whitley. He's really going to be key to their defense. He discovered this summer that he has a tumor in his heart.
I did not hear about that. Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that awful?
My goodness.
So it's really questionable whether or not he's going to be able to play. And having analyzed their roster, this is going to sound really crude after saying such a heartbreaking, no pun intended, thing that, like, I don't know that they're going to be able to deal with his loss very effectively. Like, I was sort of high on Oregon State's defense. They have a number of pretty intriguing players. They have like the nation's sack leader in Hamilcar Rashid. But like, if they're not able to anchor it because they lose Whitley, like they could actually suddenly be in a lot of trouble. So that's really awful.
You also looked at their linebacker core, Addison Gumps and Avery.
Yes.
Is it Robert? I mean, those guys are blue chippers that I think Roberts went to Nebraska and Gumps went initially to Oklahoma. So they
and those guys were injured. They lost 3 linebackers to injury last year. Jeremy Reichner and Andre Hughes Murray are the other 2. Addison Gums is the third, probably the headliner of the group. They get all 3 of those guys back. And I really like their linebacker group. Tim Tibesar is the coordinator there used to be at Wisconsin. I really like the defensive structure that they play out of. They have problems at defensive back. They just really don't have any talent there. And they put like rotating out they brought a ton of them dudes back, but then they also got a bunch of JUCOs essentially admitting like, yeah, these guys stunk. We need more, we need to throw more spaghetti at the wall to find some DBs who can cover. But again, you got to give credit to the coach for admitting it. A lot of coaches are too proud to do that. Like, no, we need to invest in our guys. And Jonathan Smith's like, no, we need new guys. It'll be interesting to watch Oregon State. I have to admit, even as an Oregon fan, I find myself rooting for those plucky rodents quite a bit. And like I said, I think
I don't dislike them. I agree.
Yeah,
I don't dislike them.
Their other problem is their offensive line. They punched above their weight, I think, last year on the offense because their offensive line was just totally loaded with seniors. Well, all those seniors have now left, and they're replacing them with, they're probably going to be playing a couple of walk-ons. Just the depth there is just not great. Now, I do think they have a hell of a offensive line coach, Jim Halshek. I think he might be one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. Frankly, I really like his development, but it's probably going to take him a couple of years to get that offensive line back up to snuff. So, yeah, I think they're sort of looking at some tough times, even though I like that coach a lot. That's probably all I have to say about Oregon State.
Yeah, no offense, just touching a few other guys. They're solid running back. Tristan Gebbia was a Nebraska guy that ended up transferring in. He actually played pretty decent. He wasn't horrible against Oregon. Like guys like Trayshawn Harris and Trey Loeb transferred in that possibly could do a little something.
Yeah,
So
Harrison's still waiting on an NCAA waiver from Florida because he transferred from Florida State.
Florida State,
But
yeah.
I think he'll get it. And I like their wide receiver core. There's a couple talented guys, but then there's also guys that we've seen for a long time. Like their least talented guy in their wide receiver core is a little kid named Champ Flemings, who's like 5 foot nothing, but like, boy, is that kid fun to watch. He is a great receiver. So yeah, I like what they got bringing back, and they did a good job rotating in backups over the course of 2019. If they get some good quarterback play, which I agree with you, Gebbia, acquitted himself well in his final game of the year. And if Mahalchik can pull a rabbit out of his hat and make this offensive line play halfway decent, this could be pretty good. And like I said, I think that Jonathan Smith calls a beautiful offense. So it could surprise people being a much better offense. The talent rating has any rights to be. It's just, it's probably going to be the case that they struggle on the offensive line. If you don't have an offensive line, you don't have a football team, especially in Jonathan Smith's type of offense. It's not like a quick release kind of, handle a bad offensive line kind of offense. So yeah, it's unfortunate because they deserve better, frankly. But yeah, I don't think they're going to have a real encouraging season, unfortunately.
And then the last team would be Washington State, obviously bringing in Nick Rolovich. He's had an interesting start to his tenure there. Good coach, loved what he did at Hawaii, but at least from my rankings and how I see it, I think that's the worst roster in the Pac-12. I know they've had several guys hit the portal. They got Max Borghi, who's a terrific running back, can pretty much do everything. What do you see from Washington State offensively? And you could and just quickly touch on them defensively. I think it's going to be it was a tough job for Leach, and what a terrific job he did for so many years. What do you see moving forward to Washington State in this abbreviated season?
You're going to have to cut me off because I find Washington State to be the most fascinating team in the league simply because I think the run and shoot is absolutely fascinating. I think it's fascinating the way that they get production out of their wide receivers, despite, you're right. Their wide receivers don't have a lot of talent. Did you think they looked like an untalented group under Mike Leach? Like Mike Leach recruited, Leach, it's true the number of those guys hit the portal, but probably not the most important guys. I think they return a core of very good wide receivers, very smart, experienced wide receivers who I don't think are going to have a hard time adapting to the run and shoot, even though that is a very, 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 very different offense from the air raid. I think they'd be able to adapt to it well. They recruited some very good quarterbacks because who wouldn't want to play quarterback under Mike Leach? And I just schematically, the run and shoot is a fascinating offense. It holds a fascinating place in the history of football. Actually, a neighbor of mine is Mouse Davis, the longtime Portland State coach, who was like the primary innovator of the run and shoot. It is absolutely fascinating. They will probably have a bad first year because every team implementing the run and shoot has a bad first year. They tend to throw a million interceptions because the structure of that offense requires the quarterback and the wide receiver simply making different types of decisions than happen in any other offense. And until they're on the same page, which without, given COVID and the problems that probably have had to do, installing that offense has probably not gone too smoothly. It's probably going to be a big problem. They also, I think the offensive line is not well suited to the types of protections they need to utilize for the run and shoot. The way maybe as much or more than the way the quarterback and wide receivers have to operate in the run and shoot. The offensive line is very, very called upon to do very, very different things in the run and shoot compared to the air raid. And I don't think their offensive linemen that Mike Leach recruited are well suited to do those sorts of things. It's going to be real deep in the weeds if you ask me to detail them. So in between sort of not a lot of talent on paper and difficulties with the install of a new offense, I think that it's probably going to be at least a year or two before that gets rolling. Although when it does, keep in mind, there are a number of standing NCAA and NFL records that are set by run and shoot teams. Like, Nick Rolovich could very well be Mike Leach too, in terms of I do not want to play that team.
Yeah.
but it's probably not going to be in 2020. And then I just don't have anything to say about the defense. They just don't have any talent, like, at all. I like Jake Dickert, the defensive coordinator, and the couple of guys that he brought with him from Wyoming. I actually, through a weird coincidence, did some film study on Wyoming's defense a couple of years ago. It wasn't Dickert at the time, but same head coach, Craig Bowl. And I think that's probably a good hire, but it's just that's one where it ain't a magic defensive structure. It requires defensive players, and they just don't have any. Like, it's a shocking void of talent. And they've lost a number of the really good ones to various unfortunate circumstances. So yeah, I think they're gonna have a rough first year, and it's probably, we don't need to elaborate much further on that.
So, in your unbiased opinion as an Oregon fan, does Oregon lose to any of the divisional opponents in this abbreviated season?
Barring crazy stuff, which we can't predict. If they started playing today with the rosters that I think that they'll play, I think the greatest threat is probably Washington. If Washington comes together, because like I said, there's a version of Washington's offense which could be very good, and there's a version of Washington's defense in which they paper over their problems and their sort of talent voids pretty effectively. And if they're able to do that, then they go toe to toe with Oregon in terms of overall talent. And any game in which two rivals are going toe to toe, you got to say is close to a coin flip, even though I like Oregon in that matchup. But then the rest of it in the Pac-12 North, it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a little bit of, you're playing some guys that are young. D-back, you're probably going to be playing a Manning or a James and newer.
Or Mikhail Wright. I mean, that's the crazy thing.
But you got Mikhail Wright, who's probably better than Lenore and Graham.
I mean, I guess I'll put it this way: Mikhail Wright, as a true freshman in 2019, had a better true freshman season than Thomas Graham or Diamond or Lenore did when they were true freshmen in 2017. So projecting forward, I would say that probably his second year would probably be as good, if not better, than Lenore or Graham's third year, which was 2019. I don't think that's difficult to say at all.
And then Dante Manning was the highest rated cornerback ever for Oregon. Under Armour All-American 5-star. So and then you lose Penei Sewell, and you're never going to replace Penei Sewell. He's the best offensive lineman in the country. PFF, I think, rated him as the best offensive line since they started it. But then you still are bringing in guys like Stephen Jones, Jonah Tenua, that were top 100 players coming out of high school too. So, I mean, as much as I'm like, man, I don't want to be biased. I don't want to act like I am just going to lean towards my team. When I just look at the roster, I see what they are on both sides of the ball. I see how good they are on their front seven. I think is unquestionably the best front seven in the Pac-12, not the North, in the Pac-12. I wouldn't trade our defensive line with anybody. Kayvon Thibodeau is the best pass rusher in the Pac-12. I mean, the linebacker core, you're bringing in the two best offensive linebackers in the prep ranks, two composite 5-stars. Isaac Slade-Matasia was a very good linebacker. Mesa Funa was a top 100 player who played at a high level as a true freshman. Adrian Jackson started, and he didn't play last year, but he started 3 games. The front seven, this is going to be tough to deal with. Any learning period is going to be, I think, minimal for the defensive backfield. And I don't know if anyone, particularly in the North, like we said, Washington has some talented wide receivers and Stanford has some talented, but if their quarterbacks are under duress the whole game and you don't have a running game, it makes you pretty one-dimensional. And I think it makes life a whole lot easier on defensive backs. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't see them losing. I mean, anything could happen. It's football. I mean, they lost Arizona State last year and they're completely better than Arizona State.
Yeah. But I don't think even Arizona State fans dispute that.
Well, you'd be shocked on Twitter, but
But I mean, I'll put it this way. I think that Oregon's going to have the best front seven in the Pac-12. in terms of their actual performance. We talked about how their interior defensive linemen don't look like they're talented, but anybody who's watched them play will tell you that they are playing way better than that. And so if they've got, and I think the front seven is going to cover up any sort of learning periods for the defensive backs.
Mhm.
And then if they have if they've got a top 5 defense, which I think they will, that covers up any sort of learning curve for the offense. This is sort of an NFL type of calculation, but if you've got a hell of a pass rush, you kind of have the rest of your team figured out. Like, there's a whole lot of team. It's going to be strange for Oregon fans, I think, to be a defensive led team, at least at the beginning of the year. But I really think that's what the situation is going to look like. I think the quarterbacks are not going to, opposing quarterbacks are not going to have 2 seconds to think.
I agree. Yep. And we talked on the north, so the south. I don't know if you want to go. Probably been going for a while, but we can just quickly go through them.
Well,
the
thing
bit.
about the south is that, like,
talked about USC. So go ahead.
Well, the thing about the South is that of the bottom 7 teams in terms of talent, 5 of them are Pac-12 South teams.
Yep.
UCLA, Utah, Colorado, Arizona or I guess it's 4. Sorry. Yeah, like, we probably don't really need to spend here. I'll knock them out right now, and this will be all that we talk about for these guys, right? UCLA is an entirely self-inflicted wound, right? Like, their talent, they're a 3-star program because Chip Kelly's making them a 3-star program. Utah, I like their development, but last year was their shot. They have to hit the reset button this year, and it's probably going to take them at least a year to get going again. I don't think they're a serious threat. And they couldn't beat USC last year, and that was their best team maybe ever. Colorado is sort of in Colorado's in a similar talent situation to Oregon State. I actually really like the way that Mel Tucker attacked the problems that he inherited, and actually thought he did a fairly good job of roster management. And then he went East Lansing. So, yep. That's an unfortunate situation. I don't think they really dig themselves out of that hole. I mean, it's a fascinating team. I could talk for an hour about them, but let's not. And then Arizona, I mean, oh boy, they have bad talent and bad coaching, so yep. They're not going anywhere either. Although I do like their quarterback, Ryan Gunnell. He's not bad, but you can't really construct a team out of one good player as much as Arizona State might want to. So let's talk about Arizona State, because they're really the only South team that's worth talking about who we haven't talked about yet.
Okay, so Arizona State, I'm gonna give kind of my opinion, and you can kind of just go from there. Jaden Daniels, I've always liked him. He was the number 1 dual threat quarterback coming out by 247 Sports. He was a 5-star by 247. He had a little bit of an up and down first year. And Arizona State's problem was their line. I didn't think they had a very consistent line, young line. They had great receivers. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk was terrific. I like Darby. I think he's a solid receiver. Ayuk went on. Darby's back. They brought in guys like Johnny Wilson, Bunkley Shelton, Elijah Badger, all 4-star guys. So I think they kind of reloaded at the position. Obviously, freshmen, you just never know what you're going to get. I don't know who they have the running back. I don't know who's taking over for Benjamin. But I think a little older offensive line, still reloading at wide receiver. I like their offense. I like the scheme. I like the offensive coordinator they brought in. So I like where they're going. Defensively, I still think they're not very strong on the defensive line. I don't think they've recruited that well there. They didn't have a strong defensive line last year. They have a couple good linebackers. Merlin Robinson definitely was a good big prospect coming out of high school. Thought he was better his first year than he was last year. And not a bad defensive backfield. Once again, pretty like Lucas and Crosswhite and I think it's Fields, and Jack Jones was a 5-star when he went to USC before he got expelled from there. So they have talent back there. Didn't always see consistency out of that, even defensive backfield and the defense in general. They have the 5th most talented roster. I like some things Herm's done. I like some of the people he's hired. I think he's hired some definitely good recruiters. Antonio Pierce, as a recruiter, is a terrific recruiter, especially the LA area. I still, they're not a complete team. I mean, they're like their offensive line, defensive line. There is holes in that team. I would still, if you were to put a gun to my head, which I don't know why you'd be doing that, but if you did, I would probably take USC still. And I think Arizona State has the talent on their roster to possibly play spoiler. I don't see them being the team that goes to even the Pac-12 South Championship. I think they lose a game that they shouldn't, maybe to like a Utah, just because there is holes. And I just think that they're far from a perfect team. But they do have some good pieces, and I do like Jaden Daniels. I think he'll be even better this year. And obviously he played great against Oregon. So that's my opinion in Arizona State. I think they have talent, but I think they have holes. There's someone that could ruin someone's day, but they also are someone that could drop a game that they probably shouldn't.
Boy, you read my mind. You said literally everything that I wanted to say about Arizona State. Like that's I mean, really, I'm not joking. You said literally everything that I wanted to say. You didn't know who the running backs were. I think, like the wide receivers, they are going to wind up playing two 4-star true freshmen that they recruited in the 2019 class. I think that Trayanum, is going to get the start, and Nagata is going to be the change of pace back.
Nagata.
Guys are 4-star. But yes, I mean, you said it. You know what? I'm going to resist the urge to just repeat everything that you said. Just refer back to your comments because you nailed it. I guess I'll pick out a couple things. Daniels, you're right. I think that he's probably the second best returning quarterback in the Pac-12, although I don't think that's saying much because there's just not that many returning quarterbacks in the Pac-12, and many of them are bad, like Thompson Robinson at UCLA. He definitely can let that ball rip. He had some true freshman problems. It remains to be seen whether or not those problems are just being a true freshman or if they're sort of, like I said about Garbers, he was fun to watch because he scrambled very well. But you have to ask yourself the question, why is this guy scrambling all the time? And the answer was not because he had bad wide receivers. So, he doesn't even have that excuse. It's because he probably scrambles more than he should. And it's because his offensive line stinks, and his offensive line's probably going to get worse. I mean, he was bad last year and it's going to get worse. They lost dudes off of an already very thin line, and they're replacing with just guys that are not talented. Like, they had to take 2 transfers just to get to 5. God help them if they get an injury. I mean, really, that's true for their entire offense. Is their first stringers, if they completely avoid injury, they'll have a 5-star quarterback, they'll have a 4-star running back, and 4 4-star wide receivers. Chad Johnson's kid was the other 4-star receiver they got in the 2019 class. They have a 4-star transfer from Texas A&M at left tackle. Although of course, he left because he didn't get any playing time. So who knows? Deech is his name. And their offensive line could be okay. They could surprise me, I guess I'll say. They got one of the transfers. The other transfer that they got in the offensive line is Haddis from Stanford. But again, rats off a sinking ship for that squad. But God help them if they can't take a single injury. If Daniels gets injured, I hope he doesn't. But they only have one scholarship quarterback on the roster, a guy named McLemore, who's a low 3-star, who's never taken a snap. Because remember in the ASU versus USC game, Daniels was injured, unfortunately, and he had to have his backup play. The backup transferred out. They don't have anybody else. God help them if they get injured. God help them if they take a single wide receiver injury, or like you noted, all of their running backs and wide receivers are true freshmen. Statistically, that's 6 guys. Statistically, you follow the rule of thirds. About a third of all your guys are going to bust. I hope it doesn't happen because I hate seeing talent wasted, but statistically, probably 2 of those 6 guys are not going to live up to their recruiting rankings. In which case, because they don't have any talent beyond those guys at all. Like, I don't mean I don't like the talent. I mean, literally they're 3-stars who've never played a game of football as a college player. They don't use their tight ends at all. It's not what we're talking about. Their offensive line probably is going to stink. It's probably going to be the worst offensive line in the Pac-12, and that's saying something for the Pac-12. I mean, Jesus Christ. So
it's so true.
So, you really nailed it. They're a team that can definitely play spoiler, but they do not have the ponies or the depth to play an entire season. Now it's going to be abbreviated season. Maybe they run out the clock, or maybe they beat the clock and get all their good football played in the first half of the year. I agree with you about the offensive coordinator in that I did not like Rob Likens, their former offensive coordinator, at all. Not really sure how well that speaks to Herm Edwards for having hired the guy, frankly, because I thought that was obvious when he hired him that he wasn't going to be good. And I did like Zach Hill at Boise State. The problem is Zach Hill's offense does not fit the talent that Arizona State has. Now, he could turn out to be a Joe Moorhead type who's like super adaptable and runs an offense that fits, but we've never seen him do that. Unlike Joe Moorhead, it was 11 years worth of doing that. Zach Hill has only run an offense at Boise State and only run a particular kind of offense with a good offensive line and excellent tight ends. And that's the opposite of what Arizona State has. Like, he's never run this sort of like high flying offense to amazing wide receivers the way that Arizona State's going to have to be configured. So we don't know whether or not that guy is going to work out. I like on the defensive side of the ball. You know what? You assessed that pretty much perfectly. Like, their most talented players, Merlin Robertson, who had a much better 2018 than 2019. I think their defensive backs are okay. They're not great. They make mistakes a lot. Jack Jones in particular, like, was really baffling to watch because I'd watch him, have a phenomenal play that made me say like, oh, that's why you're a 5-star. And then literally the next play would be like, what the hell are you doing, Jack? Like, that's not even close to what your assignment is. He's like the Justin Herbert of a defensive back. Yeah,
Herbert.
Yeah. And I mean, I share your assessment of the rest of the defensive talent. I just don't think they really have a lot, particularly the defensive line. I don't really know what to think of their defensive coordinator situation. I actually did like Danny Gonzalez. I think he got sort of a bum rap at Arizona State because those, it was very clear to me that was a talent issue, not a schematic issue. And so their new defensive coordinator situation is going to be a co-DC between Antonio Pierce, the young gun who used to play in the NFL and briefly hospital driver, and the consigliere, the former NFL coach whose name is escaping me right now.
Marvin Lewis.
Thank you, Marvin Lewis. So they're going to be co-DCs. They were probably going to, based on what Marvin Lewis coached and what the scheme that Antonio Pierce played in for his entire collegiate and NFL career, they are probably going to switch the defensive structure from a 3-3-5 to a 4-3. They really don't have the talent to run a 4-3. Not even close. Not even close to the right talent to run a 4-3. So I don't know how that's going to go. Might be a bumpy transition. Plus, I don't know how. I just don't. I have no idea how that relationship is going to work. How a co-DC thing is going to work. It's probably the case that that Marvin Lewis is like the whisperer, and Antonio Pierce is really the guy running the show. But Antonio Pierce has never really been. He was briefly a high school coach of all things. But I don't think he's ever operated a college defense before. Really don't know what to expect out of him. There's a good chance that this defense is just bad. It might not be. It could be okay, but I think okay is their ceiling is the other part. So, I just don't. As you said, I think they've got talent in the right places and pieces, and to be a spoiler. But the consistency that you need in order to win a division with a team as talented as USC. I just don't see it.
So to kind of knock this down at the end and kind of narrow it, when you break it down, the most talented rosters, I do believe it's USC, Oregon, and I think it ultimately, in kind of even how we just talk through this, you just talk through all the flaws of each team, and it really is a case of where there's just not a lot of not very good teams in the Pac-12. And I hate to bag on the Pac-12 because obviously the media loves it. They love saying how we're irrelevant. They love saying how no one cares they left. And there's a part of it that I'm like, well, you know what, most of the teams aren't very good. And then we just are talking through this, and you go through roster after roster and holes on pretty much every defensive line and almost every offensive line, and bad linebacker play and bad defenses. And you just kind of talk through it, and then you come to the end, and it's like, okay, so USC doesn't have a very good coach, but they still have a lot better talent on their roster than the rest. Because they're playing in a conference that other teams are just not very good, the likelihood of them winning it is pretty good. And then you look at Oregon, who is coached well, who does have great coordinators, and does have really solid talent on all levels. Even with the opt-outs, they are putting in guys like Mikael Wright, Verone McKinley, even like Dante Manning, a 5-star, is going to take over for Thomas Grammer Dealmador, and taking over for Penei Sewell's Jonah Tanua, these are really good players that maybe don't have the experience, but they're still very good, playing in a scheme and a team and a culture that's very good. I think they're the two best rosters. I think come December 19th, I believe they both play for the title. And I do think, biased or not, I do think Oregon, I actually think Oregon's 7-0. And will that be enough to make the playoff? We don't know. This is an unpredictable year. We really don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how many 3-loss teams, 2-loss teams, how many teams have 1, 2, 3 games canceled. We don't know, but I think the Pac-12 have done it pretty well. I think they've gotten themselves in a position that they are going to have a season. I hope, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of cancellation. And I think Oregon will be 7-0 at the end of the day. And I base that on not just everything that we've talked about over the last hour and a half. It's a little bit of adding. I don't think Oregon right now, especially since losing Penei Sewell and stuff, I don't think we can compete to win a national title. I don't think we don't have the talent of Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, but we can get to the playoff. And by next year's class, when we bring in one of the best classes in the country, we will be you can start talking, especially if we can get really good play from Tyler Shuck, you at that point could be talking as Oregon as a serious contender to take the whole thing, in my opinion.
Well, that's basically how I saw 2020 versus 2021. Before COVID, I thought that it was probably a year too early for Oregon to make a national title push, simply because, they were scheduled to play Ohio State. And so I was naturally starting to do comparisons to Ohio State. Oregon has been recruiting very well for 3 years. Ohio State's been recruiting very well since the 19th century.
Yes.
It's simply, you don't build a national championship roster off of 2 or 3 years of good recruiting. It has to be top to bottom, man. It was the case that 2021 was probably the earliest that they could seriously compete for it, especially because it's not 2010 anymore, where you can make the national title game because no one had caught up to the way that your offense was structured yet. It's in the era of the playoff. You really do need to be really one of the absolute best 4 teams in order to have a shot at winning it all. You can sort of sneak into the one of the semifinal games, but you'll be exposed, as Oklahoma has, for the last couple of years, because they don't have a defense. And to really be an Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, level team where you actually are on the stage and capable of winning it all. Oregon was probably a year away, so I don't think there's any shame in saying that. But I basically endorse your logic. I think there's only 3 teams in the Pac-12. Excuse me. I think there's only 3 teams in the Pac-12 that have the talent to compete for the Pac-12 title, and that's USC, Oregon, and Washington. I think that Oregon and Washington are definitely going to play, and I think that Oregon and USC are going to see each other in the title game. So we'll see it on the field. I think at the very least, those should be enjoyable games to play with that much talent.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think we're going to kind of get what we believe, and I just think it just the other rosters, and you could say that for a lot of conferences. I mean, you go to the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma and Texas have far greater talent. Obviously, the Big 12 has been just crazy this year so far. I wouldn't even know where to go with that. But in the ACC, you have Clemson and Notre Dame's in there right now, and most conferences, you do see kind of a vast difference between the top tier. So it's not that much different in the Pac-12 that you see this vast difference. And what the Pac-12 needs is they need one team, preferably, or you could have two, but one team, and maybe have it's Batman to Robin to their Batman, but we need that team to just be dominant. Just like Clemson. Look at Clemson. ACC's been bad for quite a while, but Clemson became dominant. Oklahoma has been dominated the Big 12. The Pac-12 just needs one team to just kind of break away from the parity, and I'm starting to see that. And USC had that talent difference, but they've just been a mess with their culture, a mess with the coaching staff. And it started after Pete Carroll with Lane Kiffin and Sarkisian, and then Heltman has just been kind of a downward spiral with the whole culture at USC because there was that kind of difference talent-wise. Well, you're seeing Oregon now accumulating that talent while having a much better culture. And I think Oregon really is just, like you said, they're 1 year away from just kind of like pulling away from the pack and just being better in every aspect, where they can just run through the Pac-12 and really give the Pac-12 kind of its golden soldier. It's you call it whatever you want to call it. Call it the Clemson of the Pac-12. Call it the Oklahoma of the Pac-12. But someone that can just kind of ride the ship and be the lead dog. And Oregon is pretty much a signing class, in my opinion, away from being that team.
Well, it's certainly looking like that for 2021. I mean, the team, I endorse the way that you are looking at it. Like the way that the conferences and the playoffs is structured. It favors having one good. Like the way the USC was referred to back in the Pac-10 days is a USC and the Nine Dwarves. Like that's what Clemson and the ACC is. That's what Oklahoma and the Big 12 is. To some extent, it's even the case that it's Ohio State and the rest of the Big 10. I mean, if you look at the historical records, there's no single team in all of college football that dominates its conference the way that Ohio State dominates the Big 10.
I forgot about me, right? Yep.
I know there are some other good, it's the Big 10 because it has teams like Penn State and Wisconsin and Michigan in it. Is not quite the joke that, the Big 12 and the ACC, absent their two top, best two teams are. But, nonetheless, you look at the historical record, Ohio State might as well be, the Clemson of that league or the Oklahoma of that league. And for the Pac-12, the natural team, the team that it sort of, if things went the way that structural advantages, would indicate, is that their natural team is USC. And it's sort of hard pill to swallow, I understand, for Oregon fans, but like, it really is true. Like when they were on, they were just monopolizing all of the West Coast talent, and they could reinforce their structural advantages with actual advantages. And they, not to say that Pete Carroll's a bad coach or anything, but he didn't need to be a great coach, like he just had all the talent. Like the disparity between him and the second best team, that was Washington during the Don James era. I know that Don James and Pete Carroll weren't at the same time, but like, the thorn in Washington side under Don James was USC for, pretty much the same reasons that like they just monopolized all the talent. And USC's in a position where they can monopolize the talent. Hell, they still kind of do. They do, I believe both of us have said, it is the number one most talented roster top to bottom in the Pac-12, at least on paper. But you're right, just sort of, their culture has been dooming, and now who knows how long that's going to last. Like they hire a crackerjack coach and they could turn it around immediately. That's what having 5-star talent on your roster lets you do. So Oregon better strike while the iron is hot. I don't know. I really don't know if Oregon's recruiting situation is sustainable for the next 10 years, because I can't predict that USC is going to be down for the next 10 years. I mean, as an Oregon fan, I hope they are. But I don't know that you can really definitively say that, but at least 2020, 2021, probably the year after that, there's probably a 4-year window or so where the iron's going to be hot, and I agree with the way that you frame it. And then the other interesting thing in the Pac-12 is what's going to happen to Washington. That's a program that probably, if you look at their history, as a football team, they probably should be doing better than they have been. They basically took a snoozer for 25 years after Don James resigned. But if you look at their structural advantages and their commitment to football, and being in a big city and so forth and so on, like they ought to be better. They're probably going to have a bit of a rough time in this transition. Like I said, I was not wild about Chris Peterson's roster management, and Jimmy Lake has to deal with that. And he's going to be a first-time head coach. I think he kind of has a dud of a defensive coordinator hire. I think there's sort of, they have a lot of talent on the roster, but like I said earlier, I think it's undistributed problems, but those are potentially all temporary problems. It's going to be an interesting question to see whether or not, they have another Don James era in them. I think that they potentially do from their structural advantages. So, if you look at the sort of this league should be USC versus Washington every year. And I know Oregon fans don't want to hear that, but just structurally, that's what it ought to be. And so Oregon's kind of defying gravity right now. And like all Oregon fans, I got my fingers crossed that they supercharge the engines and they can just fly forever. But I think you sort of have to acknowledge that, like, USC and Washington are both, a couple of good hires away from really being able to seriously compete and dethrone Oregon. But at least for right now, it's good to be the king.
Yeah, I mean, and we you have to be honest. I'm not an Oregon native, and part of the appeal to me, I lived out on the West Coast, moved to Los Angeles, and that's actually when I became an Oregon fan. But a lot of the appeal of Oregon was the fancy uniforms, the affiliation with Nike, the amazing facilities. So Oregon did have that appeal, and then they had an innovative offense, obviously under Chip Kelly. But I mean, those days have kind of gone by, but they've kind of rode the coattails with all the other aspects that come with Oregon. And if they can continue to win, and especially if they can take a national title, they could become Clemson-ish in the fact, I think Clemson would be a fair comparison, because Clemson for years, it's in South Carolina, but that's not the best hotbed of that area. And for years, they were competitive, but they weren't at all a tier one school. And you think about the ACC, the Miami, Florida State, were definitely have longer success than Clemson. But Clemson was able to kind of get the ball rolling, and all of a sudden it's become what it's become: 5 straight playoff appearances, 2 national titles. And Oregon has kind of more going for it because it's affiliation with Nike, it's innovative facilities, and and even playing a weaker conference, perhaps, that if they can get the ball rolling, who knows how long it goes for. I mean, you really don't know. And like I said, you have people like Oregon. I live up here in the Midwest. People wear Oregon. You see Oregon stuff on people more than almost any other college team, to be honest with you. I saw a kid tonight. My son had a football game. 2 kids had Oregon uniforms on. And like I said, I'm not from Oregon, and I know several of my neighbor's a huge Oregon fan. He's not from Oregon. So Oregon did just kind of get this appeal, the innovative offense, affiliation with Nike, that some people that are from Oregon probably don't realize. But there's this national brand, and that's why they're able to recruit the way they are. And that's why Mario Cristobal probably saw this opportunity. He's like, holy, I'm coming at a hot time. This team is the thing for the youth of America. They like the uniforms and the facilities and the fancy stuff. And if they can finally get through. They've been to the national title game twice, but if they finally can get through and win a national title, who knows? It could go on for a while. It could go on for a while. That's at least what I believe.
Well, and that sort of stuff is paying dividends, right? When Chip Kelly was really on at Oregon, that's when a lot of the recruits were kids, and it's sort of that they're your team's favorite team, and it's starting to pay dividends now. And then, you're probably going to see dividends from just the first couple of years of Mario Cristobal, 5, 6, 7 years down the line as well. The Rose Bowl, 16 million people watch the Rose Bowl, in front of, God and everybody and every recruit's mom. Oregon was out there defeating a longtime national power and looking, pretty exciting and fun doing it. It was shiny helmets, and everything. And and then you could definitely see it in Oregon's marketing. You can't beat Oregon for marketing, right? They, they can't send out invites to anything without Rose Bowl Pac-12 champions on it. They send that out to their academic conference invites that they're the Rose Bowl champions, right? So the way the college football is not the NFL. The NFL's set up for parity and rotation, right? Like the worst teams get to pick the highest draft picks. College is the opposite. College lets you play king of the hill, where you get to the top and you can sort of kick down the folks who are below you, and it's built so that the rich stay rich, and nobody's richer than Oregon. Thanks, Uncle Phil.
That's true. Well, man, it was awesome breaking this down. I've love once again, if anyone wants to go out and check out his stuff on Addicted to Quack, he does some amazing valuations on players, teams. Hythloday, it was awesome having you on. We'll definitely come chat here come season time. Maybe have you on mid-season, see how it's going, see Oregon winning the first 3 games. Tyler Show has like 15 touchdowns, no interceptions. Offensive line just running people over. CJ Verdell, 200-yard back-to-back 200-yard games. But we don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's going to be a good season, and I'm glad we had a season. We didn't even think we were going to have one. So to be in a position that we get to play is awesome. So, but thanks for coming on today, man. And it was great chatting, and I will talk to you soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was fun. Good talking to you. Take care.
All right, thanks, man. Have a good one.